Thank you to everyone who is helping us with our transcripts. You're doing a great job helping us make sure they're published together with the podcast. If you'd also like to help out with publishing the podcast or even with gathering links for the show notes, just email us at hey@uxpodcast.com. Hey or HAJ.
UX Podcast Episode 285.
Hello everybody, welcome to UX Podcast, coming to you from Stockholm, Sweden. We are your hosts, James Royal Lawson
and Per Axbom.
And we're balancing business, technology, people and society with listeners all over the world, from Malta to Turkmenistan.
And today we are joined by Christopher McCann. He's an individual, team and leadership coach. He's also a design leader and educator.
Christopher has not only joined us as a guest on one of the earliest UX podcast episodes, I think it was episode number 6, he's also featured as a co-host in a number of shows, including Communicating Design Decisions with Tom Griever and The Build Trap with Melissa Berry.
He also happens to be the person who introduced you and myself to each other.
That is true.
Yeah.
But today, though, our topic is not about how long Chris has been involved in the podcast or where we met or how we met. It's actually going to be brainstorming.
And what could one possibly say about brainstorming? Turns out, quite a lot.
Now, this is got to get this in my head right now. So, Chris, you've joined us a fair few times on the podcast, but the last time you were on the podcast, you, Per, weren't on the podcast.
Exactly.
That's right. That's right.
Because me and you, Chris, we interviewed
Melissa Berry.
Yeah.
Lovely woman.
3 years ago now.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, welcome back again, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, what we're going to talk about today, though, is brainstorming. Now, I think that brainstorming seems to have got a bit of a bad rap in recent years. I've been noticing stuff that's dissing brainstorming a bit and coming with criticisms about why it's not necessarily a great method to deploy. One of the ones I can think of, the criticisms I can think of, is that it can be very dominant characters that take over brainstorming meetings, so you don't actually brainstorm very much. You end up just amplifying the ideas of a particular individual.
But it also feels like you're forcing people, now you have to be here and think and come up with ideas.
Oh yeah, I mean the environment's really important. But I think you have to take it one step back and ask yourself, what are you doing brainstorming for? I mean, what do you want to get out of it? I mean, brainstorming was designed in the late 40s by ad men to generate lots of ideas, and they decided, a fellow named Alex Osborne decided that the best way to do it was to not criticize and not have any sort of judgment. And I think that worked. But I think now we want to do something with our ideas. So there's a little bit different. I think we've come longer in our thinking around creative thinking, and there's been a lot more research. So I think there's ways of engineering out some of the limitations of brainstorming, like you mentioned, forcing people to talk. And I think that's one of the big weaknesses. It's the social aspect of it. We want to get along with people. You don't want to disagree necessarily.
So the classic brainstorming session would put you in a position where you're likely to agree with someone's idea that they suggest.
Right.
Rather than...
Even though you're not even though you're supposed to defer judgment.
Right.
This is my view of brainstorming. You get a bunch of smart people together. I think in Alex Osborne's book, it was like 10 people, 10 ad men, and they just fire out ideas.
10 ad men, the same age.
Pretty much, yeah.
Same
probably.
demographic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
This was 1948 when he wrote the book. So and we watched Mad Men, the TV show. So you do the math. So you have a lot of people, although there was Peggy in there on Mad Men, the show, which was good. So, you're just blowing out all these ideas. And if you have them if the highest paid person's in the room, you're going to fall into a social construct that's going to benefit you. We're social animals. We don't want to not be in the group. So you're going to self-censor yourself quite easily there.
So the result is not actually producing the ideation, the producing of ideas, the brainstorming doesn't happen.
Well, people self-censor themselves, so they're not going to give you those crazy ideas because they're going to think even though they're not supposed to. You get the eye rolling, you get the little smirk. So you're going to get people will limit themselves. They won't go crazy. You're not going to go crazy with your boss in the room. But this comes down to really how does a group have any relationship with one another? How do they get along? How open is the communication? How much psychological safety do they have? I think a lot of these things play a part into the classic form of brainstorming.
So what I'm hearing is like from when it was kind of invented, the purpose of brainstorming has also shifted to what you were saying. We actually want to produce something in the end or make something happen in the end, whereas they were perhaps brainstorming just ideas for ads.
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, he doesn't go into details in his book that much more, but to me, I mean, I think so. One of the limits of it is the social aspect of it, for sure. And then the other one is that it's just an idea. You don't do anything with it. That's kind of part two. So you're in some ways wasting an opportunity, because when you merge different ideas from a lot of different sources, is that you're going to get better ideas. So there's no collaboration. So if we go back to the sort of the social aspect, one of the weaknesses that I see a lot in both brainstorming and any other kind of creative activity is really you need to have a good facilitator, because a good facilitator will be able to manage the situation so you don't have one person who takes up all the space. So you can invite some of the more quiet people to speak. So there's ways. I think this is the biggest challenge. Is I've been to many brainstorming sessions where the people that are facilitating it just don't really have the knowledge or the skills to facilitate it well.
Sometimes they're actually from within the same company.
Usually.
So there's also this power imbalance social structure as well.
It's very often the CEO or the highest paid person going to say, now we're going to brainstorm. And everyone's like, okay, great. What should we do now? So, I mean, there's lots of ways you can get around that too. I mean, there's a lot of tools from Liberating Structures, for example, which we can add in the show notes. And they have their, the classic 1, 2, 4, all. And the idea is that you let people individually come up with some ideas, then you pair them up, so there are two people, and then they work and they distill their ideas together, and then you take that pair and they join up with another two people, and then they join together and synthesize their ideas, and then you share it with the rest of the group. Now, the value of this one is, first of all, you let people do it by themselves first, so they do it silently, so there's no judgment, and people that are quiet, people that don't feel like being, introverts, this is a great way of getting value from somebody hearing their opinions. And then you start to collaborate. You're gonna merge them together. And when you start merging ideas together, that's when the real magic happens. And you keep doing that in larger and larger groups, and then until you get to the entire group. So that's one way of managing this particular social aspect of brainstorming.
So starting off as individuals, so you kind of like work with your own mind.
You work by yourself, right?
Is that something you would do in the brainstorming session, or would you do it as like homework or preparation?
You could do it like that. But what I tend to do time everything, and so I think people can produce a lot more things in a limited amount of time than they think they can. So that's typically what I like to do. You could give it as a homework assignment.
I mean, have you noticed any kind of, I think about quality of result or kind of how long you've come? Do you get further by having them do it as homework before the session, or do you actually generally come to the same quality of result anyway, even if you do it in the session?
I think in the session you're forcing them to do it. I think if you give it as homework, my experience is that 50% won't do it.
And then you'll have that power imbalance again, because some people will spend 2 hours on it, and they'll come with all these notes, and all of a sudden they have the upper hand.
Which typically what happens. So someone will come in and they'll have like 30 post-it notes, and another person will come in and it'll be, like maybe one or none, or my dog ate it, or any other sort of excuse.
Oh, that's really interesting what you said about the post-it notes now, because I've been in a lot of workshops where people actually keep glancing at each other because everybody's writing post-it notes. Oh, that person has written 7 and I've only written 2. And that, I guess, is the facilitator's job then, to help people feel comfortable with that difference.
Exactly, and that's definitely a risk. If you have them together, then they can see, oh, that you did 10 and I only did 2. Because again, we're putting ourselves in a group. You're comparing yourself to other people in the group. You want to stay in a group. So if 60% of the group have done 10 and you did 2, you're like, oh shit, I'm going to get kicked out of my group. And this is from biology. This is from our time on the savannah. When you got kicked out of the group, you died. So we have that still in our bodies, in the way we think. And so that's not going to disappear in the next 100,000 years probably. So we need to find a way to manage that today in 2022.
So how do you switch the focus to what you're actually trying to achieve? Because brainstorming, what the hell is brainstorming? What are we brainstorming about? And how do you then stop the inward looking aspect, or the kind of individualistic behavior and the group behavior? How do you actually turn the focus?
Well, I can say a couple things about that. First, before I would do a brainstorming, and I really wouldn't call it a brainstorming because that's loaded with a lot of beliefs, limiting beliefs, I would even say. I would advise having what I call question storming. And typically, and this is a way of saying, to ensure what we're working on is the right thing, what we're working on. We're really quick to get into the solution side of things when we're managing a problem. We think we know what the problem is, so let's get some solutions out there. But if you have a question storming, which is a good first thing, is saying, okay, what questions? Let's generate some questions about this area that we want to develop a solution around that can clarify this more. What questions should we have there? And that's a really great way of sparking this process where you can actually define and even question assumptions about what we're working on or preparing to work on in a different way. So I really like to do that first. Asking some good questions might trigger an insight that maybe this isn't the right problem, the problem is something else. And then you can go and have another generative session around working with some solutions to manage that.
Love that.
Question storming.
Yeah, exactly. And because that also circles back to what you were saying before, we need to be aware of what are we trying to get out of the brainstorming session, because people come up with all these ideas. Oh, so today we're brainstorming about this, and I have all these ideas about solutions, but in fact, not everybody has the same idea of what we're trying to solve.
Right. So, another way of doing that is you can ask a question before you even start a brainstorming. And this is you'll notice that these are all facilitative tools. This is what someone who from the outside should really be in there saying, okay, what do you want to get out of this hour together? To all of the people in the group, and ask them, what do you want to get out of this? And people are going to be honest. Some people aren't going to be honest. Some people might say, I don't really even want to be here because this is complete bullshit. Yeah. Well, that's information, and you can work with that too. But if you're getting a lot of different answers, your expectations are different, and then if you're not sensitive to that, what you leave the meeting with is not going to be in line with what certain people are expecting. And then people are going to have negative thoughts about that, or this was a waste of time, or this was really valuable, or things like that. So, part of it is, when you're working with a group, you want to design how you're going to work together, how you're going to speak together. What do we do if we disagree? What do we do? All these things. Again, I'm going back to facilitation because that's really where I see the weakness in the brainstorming sessions I've been involved with.
And that makes me think that the session begins far, far before the session takes place, because you actually have to start preparing people for what's going to happen, what do I expect of you, how are we going to work together. So the better you're at doing that, the better, of course, the session will work. Absolutely.
Again, so and to me, what you're describing there is a good facilitation where you did some pre-work and decided, okay, let's see where we are at, where we want to go. How do I draw people into the conversation? How do I make sure we keep aligned? What do I do if there's a disagreement? All those different things. Absolutely. Preparation.
Speaking of preparation, it makes me think about like research. So I guess if you've done some actual research around a topic, how does that weave into or end up being a brainstorming session? If you end up at a brainstorming session, but you do have some research, is there a risk that you're ignoring that research, you're conflicting with it, or it's? I think I'm asking more like, is there a time? When do you know it's the right time and place for a brainstorming session? That's probably the question I'm really asking.
Yeah, but then we're not. Then I would choose to use different words for what you're talking about. To me, research would probably be an input to brainstorming. Insights that we know about the problem that we learn from research.
I think, Chris, maybe it's just that experience of it's been used as a substitute for research so many times, and we'll solve this with a brainstorming session.
Right.
So we'll put our minds together. It's like a focus group almost. We're going to come together. We're going to work this out. Whereas the true thing you should be doing is probably some proper deep research about the problem space before you start working on solutions.
I mean that's the weakness for most of these innovation processes or design processes or anything. If you're ignorant to what the real problem is, or the people around it, or how it's going to influence the people, the environment, the system, I think I'll throw that in there because you have to think about a larger context than just the person or the group. If you're doing that ignorant, then it's kind of like garbage in, garbage out. You're not going to get a solution, or the ideas you come up with aren't going to be really relevant to solving the problem. But again, this is the classic, empathize step of any of the design thinking, is to understand, the context, the people, the system of the problem. And if you choose not to do that, then, well, you're definitely not going to be user-centered.
But you're going to go forward.
Yes, you will make progress, but progress towards what? That's my question. And then we can come in. And I don't really want to talk too much about this, but then it's theater, in my opinion. It's just I'm going to do the thing, and I can say I checked off the box, but we're really going to do the stuff we thought about anyway, from the stakeholders who are sort of guiding our work.
It's interesting because I think a lot of ways people address this is they say, well, we bring in diversity, we bring in lots more different people with different experiences. But then that takes me back to, well, then you still have the power imbalance and the power structures playing in. So it really doesn't matter if you bring them all in unless you actually are able to help them all speak their own truths.
Absolutely. And I think diversity also, that's a really good, because I think you want to get a variety of ideas. I mean, if you look at the research behind a lot of this, because he did this in 1948. The first study around this brainstorming idea was done in 58, I think, and then it's been done periodically since then. And you've learned a lot about this, is that you need to have diverse ideas, because if everyone has the same ideas, then it's pretty uniform. And you also need to have perspectives from completely not the same place. So if you go back to how it was created with a bunch of admin. So basically, that was a pretty uniform group. So what you want to do is you want to pull in someone who is not an admin at all, who is working at the local shop down in the corner, or someone from a completely different socioeconomic background. And that's when you're going to get the really good ideas, because they're going to be very different. And then you need to have some kind of way for them to talk about, to collaborate, to take bits and pieces from each one of the ideas and move them, put them together, and then you're going to that's when you really get the innovative ideas. Cross-pollination. Yeah. And I would say the biggest, for me, one of the best ways of doing it is just to get a lot of information in your head, to read a lot of different subjects. There was a study, there was a place in MIT after the Second World War called Building 20. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. That's when Noam Chomsky developed his theories about learning. And that was a barrack, basically, from the Second World War that was built at MIT. And it was a pretty crappy building, basically, and they had a lot of different people were working there, a lot of different scientists, they had authors, they had all these different people. And the stuff that came out of that lab was incredible. So they said, why is this working? And the real reason is that you could have Noam Chomsky walking down, talking to an astrophysicist, talking to a behavioral psychologist, looking for where the coffee machine was, and run into each other and talk about things. And that is where the real idea generation happens, where you get different perspectives, completely non-related, and say, yeah, okay, great, let's talk about this, and share, my perspective with your perspective, and then that's when stuff happens. But also the other thing there was there was a lot of downtime for people. To get a good idea, that's what I call the information gathering stage. But then you need to say, okay, I'm gonna just chill out now. It needs to percolate, as I call it, just like a good cup of coffee. And that's what this Building 20 allowed. So, interesting study.
That is really, from the design profession perspective, for me, that is so important, because that's something we talk so much about, that just allowing stuff to just go for a walk. But it's so hard to argue within the sphere of your workplace that, I need to go for a walk, and I'm still going to cost money. I'm still working, but I'm just going to go for a walk because that will make my results better. How do we even argue for that?
Well, that's a good point. Especially as a consultant, you're going to say, okay, I'm charging you 3 hours extra for me to hang out and take a walk, or go with my dog, or do some gardening or something like that. In some ways, that's the challenge of using what I'll call our factory mentality of work. Is you stand there and you do your thing and you pass it on to the next person. It's when you're doing knowledge work, it's not physical anymore. You're using your brain. So if you look at the research, how you use your brain, of course you need to have downtime to do that. There's a lot of studies that support that. So that's just how the human brain works. That's how the machine works that we're trying to manage. So, but people in organizations we still tend to organize our work around the sort of the factory assembly line model, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I was reflecting back as well, what you said about diversity. Diversity is one of those words that's there's lots of different flavors of it, but the automatic one, I think what you were referring to with diversity, Per, was the kind of, I suppose, classic diversity of maybe different ethnic groups or neurodiversity perhaps as well. Whereas
it can be anything.
But what we're talking about here is absolutely, and I think that's the real point about it, that we're talking about diversity of experience, intellectual diversity, as well as so diversity on all fronts.
Absolutely, it could be age. You can have children involved. It can be different groups from different countries. Definitely different backgrounds. Anything where you're going to get someone who has different life experiences is going to look at something and say, hey, this is my perspective. Because everyone's going to have a different perspective. And there's going to be some value in everything. No one perspective is the best. So, and I think sometimes when I see what's happening in the design world, at least what I see in Sweden, everyone reads the same books. Everyone goes to the same conferences. Everyone does the same things, listen to the same podcasts, except this one, of course. This one's very diverse. And you tend to say, you tend to, get your information from a very, like a bit of a bubble. So my question is you need to start reading magazines that you would never, ever consider reading. For me, if I go to the dentist's office and there's a book there's a magazine on like sailing or cars or things that I'm completely not interested in, those are what I would grab and to read. And why would I do that? A, because I know nothing about cars or sports or boats, but I can guarantee you that there's a problem in there for a boat owner that's been solved in a way that's interesting in another area that I'm working on. And it's really come in handy with me through most of my career. And so I would invite everyone, read something that you're not interested in, and even something that you would almost say that you would hate and see what happens.
Oh, this is
nice.
a really interesting dichotomy, because of course, as an industry, we're constantly striving after the ready solution. We've got ready-made design systems, we've got kind of ready-made templates, we've got patterns for interaction, we're constantly hunting for that definitive answer. Yet what we're saying is what you need is the complete opposite in many times, many situations.
Well, I think there we're talking about two slightly different things. There you're talking about
But they're conflated, I think.
Production of design. To me, those are production of design. At one point, you had to think up what was going to be in the design system. That's design. The production of making something consistent, a consistent interface, you're going to need to use your design system. But that was thought up. Those design solutions were thought up at one point. That's design. There's a distinction there.
Or are we just Googling all the time? As soon as you're not actually doing the idealization. You're actually, when you're supposed to be thinking of something, you're actually just searching.
Okay.
And you're solving the new problem. So I have this problem, and I have all these tools that we came up with 3 years ago. I'm going to use those to apply to this problem, even though the problem may not actually be something that can be solved with those tools.
Yeah. Someone must have done this before.
Yeah, and that's, I have no problems. I think that's good. But that's when you have, that's what I'll call part of the information gathering stage. But then you need to let that percolate. One of my favorite artist typeface persons is Eric Spiekerman, and he tells a story about how when he has designed many famous typefaces, and he would basically, to design a new typeface, he would go visit a couple of different small towns and look at what typeface was most popular there. He's grew up in Germany.
When you say most popular there, I mean he's kind of like looking at
looking at the typefaces. Exactly.
Right.
He'd just go and get a bunch of different. He would wander around and get a bunch of different typeface inspirations, and then he would wait a week. And then he would try to recreate what he remembered a week ago. And that would always be something new, but with the inspiration of what he saw on those trips. So what I would suggest is you do the same thing with all the things you're looking at, all these different types of interface designs or whatever other people have done. Do that. Go out, make notes. Make notes in your notebook. Remember them, the ones that moved you. Put them in a notebook, close it for a week, 2 weeks, and then think back what you thought, what you experienced, and what you remember from that, and form it into something new. And I guarantee you that will be a completely new design.
So we're seeding rather than replicating.
Right. You're letting your subconscious. It's the downtime. You're letting your subconscious percolate, go over these things. You're going to remember certain things because they resonated with you, certain details. And then other ones you're going to forget or they're going to become less important. And what you come up with will be something new, I guarantee you.
And then circling back to the organization where we're doing the brainstorming, I mean, it takes a special kind of organization to allow for that space, that percolating, as you're alluding to, but also with everything we've said now, with all the ideas that we're bringing in and getting fantastic new ideas from all these different people with different backgrounds and experiences, how do we ensure then, because now we've talked about before the brainstorming, during the brainstorming, what happens after the brainstorming? How do you make sure that we take care of all these ideas? How do you make sure everybody feels that it was worthwhile? Do we even have the vocabulary to understand what people were saying and about their experiences? Because we don't have them. Are we sure that we actually understood what they said?
Yeah, yeah. And that's a good point. I mean, what do you do with all the secondary ideas, or which one, how you choose? And, and then I would say you're going to have to make it real. You're going to have to make it into something more tangible, some of them, or anytime you have, until you make it real, it's a cognitive exercise more than anything. That's why I typically like to use the design studio methodology where you sketch, where you're starting to make this, put it into some kind of real mode where you can start to experience it in a non-mental way. And that works really, really well because you can do lots of things really quickly. But at some point, you need to make it real. You have to realize this and say, what does this, if I can hold it, if I can see it, if I can experience it, an experience is going to be very, very different because in your mind, everything's perfect. You know, when you're thinking of the great idea, you're like, this is a fucking great idea, man. This is like the best ever. And then you write it down or you draw it and you're like, oh, or even you open your mouth. For me, I love talking about, I have a great idea in my head when I'm talking. Like right now, I have a lot of great ideas. And I know if I were to throw them out here, number one, you guys would say, what the hell are you doing that on a podcast? But number two would be, it would come out of my mouth and I would realize that was a stupid thing to say. So it's when you have something it's very mental and then you make it real into sound, that even is a good way of testing it. And it's the same thing with more complex ideas. You can, if you make something, a model, a prototype, anything that you can experience in a different way, you're gonna be able to evaluate it from a different plane, I would say.
Which then you're saying really is that we always need to be moving, because otherwise we won't get anywhere. So we can't brainstorm forever. So we need to start making things, even though they're just prototypes on paper or whatever, because then it's easier to talk about
exactly.
them.
We can talk around
with everyone.
Yeah.
And then then I lost my track there completely.
Well, then you have something to talk about, and then you can say, is this right? Does it make any sense or not?
Right. And then you have to be prepared to be wrong.
Right. So you can't hold them too perfectly too. That's why having like paper things is a great thing. That's why I like sketching, because you have Post-it notes are great. You can crumble them up and throw away. You can make a new one. It's not nothing. Nothing's gonna. There's no money lost. Well, there's of course we're gonna recycle all the paper, but I mean there's no real cost to that.
And you have to be around people who will accept that you are wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some people say, oh, but you know what, you have to disagree in it to them. I think of a good level of disagreement is good. I think that's why I use the critique method, where you do it in a structured way. But you're not always going to agree, and a little bit of tension is, I think, healthy for some of these issues.
I think we're saying that there is no, as with everything, there's no like set recipe. This is how you do brainstorming.
No,
it always has to be specific to your context and situation.
And also, I think nothing is as simple as it sounds.
Yeah.
Right. And it's very contextual. It's contextual to the problem, to the group. And you're right. There's no simple brainstorming. First of all, it's a sort of one of these words that it means a lot of things to a lot of people. And I think it's very specific to what you want to do.
Thank you, Chris.
Anytime.
So when it comes to brainstorming, everybody seems to have an idea of what brainstorming is. And it seems like everybody has this attitude of course, let's do a brainstorming session. And you just kind of think that, well, a brainstorming session will go fast and it's something that anyone can do and it's easy to set up. But as it turns out, a brainstorming session can be incredibly complex and need a lot of planning and a lot of work to turn out right.
Yeah, so many of the things I guess that we deal with is that it looks simple on the surface. You can grab that pile of sticky notes and throw them out, and we can all like start scribbling things down. And that little task is simple, but the structure and mechanism and thinking behind all this is much more complex. And I think I was reflecting over the whole chat with Chris. There's lots of useful tips, but also this thought kept coming up of we're papering the cracks. A lot of the tips that Chris gave are excellent, but he was very professionally, very, very adaptedly picking up on things that were broken.
Yeah.
And papering the cracks, adapting what he was doing to a situation which was broken, but he would be able to fix it as the facilitator, as the manager of these workshops. I think he said like a lot of it is down to social dynamics. You can't kind of fix the social dynamics when you're in the group, but you can adapt and adjust for those social dynamics once you've realized they exist.
Exactly. That makes me think that the brainstorming session with a good facilitator actually turns into a learning moment for the organization, because you might discover things in the brainstorming session that weren't even part of what you were trying to learn.
Yeah. I mean, Chris pointed out about like question storming instead of brainstorming. And to focus on why you're actually and why you're doing it. And I tried to get Chris to I suppose, jump on my cause of the fact that I think a lot of the time we do brainstorming instead of research. And Chris goes, but the research we can use as input. And I realise that Chris would manage the situation so that if you, by things like question storming or the way he would structure the event, the session, if he realised you hadn't done the research, he'd get you to a point of realising that you hadn't done the research, and then the fact that you need to do it before going on.
Exactly. He wouldn't tell them, oh, you haven't done the research. He would actually, yeah. So when people are doing the wrong thing, you don't just tell them they're doing the wrong thing. You actually help them discover what they've done wrong.
And you don't just plough on doing the wrong thing.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, reflecting back, I mean, Chris's coaching qualities do shine through on his tips and advice. And it just makes you realise the power of having a good facilitator in these sessions, and how many times I've sat through very poor brainstorming sessions, or ad hoc sessions, I guess, which are just papering the cracks.
Right, and that's something I was thinking as well. What percentage of all the brainstorming sessions I've been in have actually been good brainstorming sessions? Just a minuscule amount of them, I would assume, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose thinking back, how many times have you been in sessions where it's been a good independent facilitator?
Right.
I mean, it's in my world, it's rare that we've had a facilitator who I'd probably consider to be a facilitator rather than someone who has been self-appointed or is a default.
Yeah. And that also makes me think about how important it is for all organizations to evaluate what they're doing in terms of workshops and brainstorming sessions. Because another favorite snippet that I think Chris was on to was this progress towards what? Because it always feels like we're moving forward. If we've done this brainstorming session, it feels like we've done something good. But without all the other things we talked about, like the setup, the onboarding, the offboarding, the follow-up, and making sure that we're working towards the common goal, without all that, how do we know we're even moving in the right direction?
Absolutely. And I'm wondering as well about how you deal with the situations of being thrown into ad hoc brainstorming sessions.
Yeah.
How do you empower yourself as an individual in that group to steer it to a good conclusion or to a better format?
That's a really good point. I mean, that's something excellent takeaway for all listeners. Getting these ideas of how a good workshop and brainstorming session should be, and that actually probably you can think about that a bit and imagine some questions you would ask to also surface what is wrong in the current session you're in, and perhaps even make it better as you're sitting in it.
Yeah, very practical and useful tips.
Mm.
Recommended listening, Pau.
Yeah, I noticed you wrote down toxic dogmatism. That's something I hadn't thought about for a while now. It's one of Lisa's articles, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first one we did over a year ago, episode 252. And in her article from that episode is based on, she does actually call out journey maps. I think jokes about calling out personas as well. And you brought up how much you liked the fact she'd called out journey maps. And I took it a little bit step further and called out brainstorming in that show. So maybe worthwhile going back and listening to see what we said then and how it ties in with what Chris has said now. And on top of that, I had another one, which I think is essential listening. Not just recommended listening. Now I've just upped it and said essential listening. Yeah. Episode 183, which is meeting design with Kevin Hoffman.
Oh yeah, that's so practical, extremely practical. I see why you say essential. Yes,
yeah. I think given my reflection and thought about how you'd steer these situations where you aren't quite on course into something better, Kevin's advice in that episode I think will be essential.
Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side.
So last week I was really angry at my friend Mark for stealing my dictionary.
Yeah? You're really angry at Mark?
Yeah, I had to tell him, Mark, my words.